throw a question into the reclassification schemes that are no doubt afoot. So you mentioned, for people who aren't privy to it, I was asking Sam and Claire earlier, what's up with Callandrena? Because all the species that I think are Uandrena are called by Discover Life Callandrena, and that's apparently a more recent conception. And let's say we consider that valid. It's still going to be an issue if I want to go to any key anywhere to figure out the species level ID. I want to call the ones that are now Callandrena Uandrena, right? So how do you navigate that? How do you decide at what point the 1975 LaBerge paper is no longer the point of reference?
I would say you have to acknowledge it right in the key,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
We're using this taxonomy.
Yes.
And you can have two keys, and like you could have, here's the LaBerge key, LaBerge era subgenus key, and the, let's call it the new one, subgenus key, or just stick with the LaBerge one. It's still the dominant way people think about subgenera.
Right. So what it raises an issue, and this is sort of a more, designing of the resource question, but if I were looking for subgenera in Discover Life or a comma was called Taeniandrena in Discover Life, I would go to the wrong key for sure. I would have no chance of pursuing it all the way to species, right? So there needs to be, anytime we say something that's in flux, somewhere it needs to be said, hey, just so you know, you better check Uandrena for this too.
I think that harkens back to, like in Discover Life, that we need to have header information on each of the guys like we do now for Xylocopa, and we're moving in that direction. We started to do the how to make modifications to Discover Life videos yesterday with Clare. And so you could say, here's what's going on in the guide. Additionally, if there's enough people who can help make these changes, we can go to the species pages, which will reflect John Asher's subgenus. It'll say this is the subgenus, but right below that, it could have a note that says, until recently, because it's not going to have any context, it could say something like, until recently considered to be Uandrena in this particular case.
Yeah,
and maybe other taxonomic things that keeps people up to date. So yeah, we're actively, Claire and I, Claire's taking the lead, are actively moving in those kinds of directions to add this extra information to Discover Life, because it's such a, it's a place that a lot of people go, and we want to decrease the amount of confusion sometimes because of these issues.
Only sometimes.
Not that we're not confused ourselves sometimes. Yeah, so you'll see more of this. Claire's got a person coming in to help, and got several of the Pennsylvania and Rob Jean who are going to actively be doing these kinds of things. And I think we'll have once we get our tools set up, we'll have a more active call for people to start working directly on species pages, modifying them, having a standard format, things like that, to address all this. And then particularly the Westerners, you Westerners are going to probably have to start developing your own groups to work on things, not because we couldn't, but because we're consumed by just the problems of the Eastern stuff, and we're not really identifying Western material. So it'd be nice to form some Western groups to start tackling the Western species a little bit more than have happened.
I wanted to throw one other thing in here, which is, I think, of general interest, speaking of us in the West. On the subgenus question, or on lots of different kinds of taxonomy, in Discover Life, I can very helpfully constrain the results to, say, the state of Oregon. And within the state of Oregon, half of the subgenera do not occur. So when you're using the dichotomous key and it directs you one place or another, it's pretty easy to very quickly check and say, oh, we don't have this one. Cross it off the list. So spurious results can be kind of throw you off the track.
So so you're saying that makes a even more of a case for keeping the subgenera up to date and letting people know what system you're using because it's being used as cross-reference.
Well, a little bit. It's about that, but it's more generally in Oregon. If I use Mike's key, say, and I think it might be, however you say it, Scrateropsis, it won't be. It won't be because in Oregon we don't have that, so far as I know.
Right.
Right. So I can, if I vetted the list, which I've done for Oregon, I can cross off half of the subgenera as not relevant. So it helps me a lot in Mike's key.
Yeah, you could. I mean, you can actually directly modify Mike's list, right? So it's Word documents, and I think I'm going to say, Mike, you're okay with this, and just pinch off the subgenera that aren't appropriate. You'd have to, renumber and that kind of thing. But
yeah, and that has been done actually out here. But it would be useful if you were in Florida or Maine or whatever to do the same thing.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. You want multiple people working on the ID stream of bees because everyone has their own set of good ideas and different people resonate with different approaches. All right. Maybe we'll jump back to subgenera directly. I guess, unless Mike, you have something to say, which we're going to put you right into saying something here because I'm going to call up the subgenera guide. And I know we were in Callandrena. Get to look at my calendar.
Do you have a question?
Okay.
Yeah, I was just wondering about the comment just now about the specialization for certain areas or states. Isn't it that Discover Live allows that already when you are subselecting one or more states, that the key modifies itself to only display the species present in that area?
Yeah, these are for other people's guides. So like Mike Arduser has a traditional guide, which we're looking at right now. So you could cross-reference to the Discover Life one and redo the dichotomous key, which a lot of people like, and get rid of the subgenera that aren't appropriate for whatever the geographic area. But yeah, it's built in already in Discover Life, recalling that the way Discover Life works with the state lists is those are lists of things that could show up in the state. So they're not actual state lists, but we are aware that lots of state lists are incomplete. So we look to fill in the gap. So if they're a species in an adjacent area, then we're probably going to list it as possibly occurring in that state as well. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't, but so many new state records are essentially places that people just haven't bothered to go to that would make sense. So just, I keep saying that because people sometimes pull lists of state species of bees from Discover Life, which is from the guides, which is not appropriate because it's potential species lists.
Yep. Thanks.
And we're constantly, and we're constantly looking to people to say, hey, I see this drops out when I'm click on this state and I think it is in that state or should be in that state. And we really need people to let us know about those things because there's just, just 4,000 species times, I guess there's still 50 states in a couple territories. So it becomes, you're bound to be making mistakes and new records are being formed all the time. So yeah, we're constantly tweaking, but mostly based on other people's comments.
Right.
So, okay, good. So Mike, I think we left off with Callandrena.
Yeah.
Do you want to go from there?
Yeah. Well, let's just briefly review Callandrena because it's the biggest subgenus in the whole genus Andrena. It's all over the country. Like we said last week, they're all specialists on some kind of Asteraceae. Sometimes at just the genus level, sometimes groups of genera. So that's an important thing because most Andrena subgenera don't rarely visit Asteraceae, surprisingly. There are some, obviously, Nemid does. But if you get to this point in the key, a couple of 26, and you've got an Andrena that's from an Asteraceae, 99.99%, it's going to be a Callandrena. So that's just a field kind of thing. But when we talk about the maxillary palps being short, no longer than the tips of the galea, the scopa, the tibial scopa, are plumose in almost all of them, I think all of them, and very rich, very plumose and very notable. And so it's a good group to know. So if you get to this point 26 and it's not a Callandrena, the next choice, you move to 27, and this is the one species of Andrena in the whole country that's, we're convinced, was introduced from the old world, the subgenus Taeniandrena. It's the only species in North America in that subgenus, and it's a pretty distinctive thing. But and I don't know if you've seen this, Sam, but last year, Chris Praz and cohorts published this revision of Old World Taeniandrena with several new species, many of which look just like wilkella. And so
maybe not.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, and it's in the Journal of Hymenoptera Research. It's got pictures. It's a really great publication, but it's just, there are cryptic species that are in that complex. So just FYI.
They didn't do any molecular checks of North American species.
No.
Wilkella.
No.
Okay.
So, but that would be.
Stay tuned.
Yeah. So the females of Taeniandrena wilkella have a super flat clypeus. I mean, it's like somebody took an iron and just flattened it. Very distinctive. They're medium-sized, 10, 11, 12 millimeters, maybe a little bigger. The legs are usually orangish red in part. And in my experience in the Midwest, it's largely a bee that goes to plants in the bean family, Fabaceae.
Brown vetch.
Yep, exactly. Vicia and other like Mellotus introduced Fabaceae. So it's interesting. But that's a species, at least in the eastern U.S., you're probably going to run across it. It's a midsummer. It's not a spring thing. It's at least in the Midwest, it's a midsummer bee, and
yeah, in fact, it's in the east here. It's one of the last Andrena. In fact, if I get an Andrena in July, I almost before the late summer Asteraceae things show up, I'm like, that's probably wilkella, because sometimes I find that I'm sort of tricked by them. Like, oh, what is that? And then, because I'm not thinking about it, but if I look at the date, June, July, then it's like there's relatively few that are that big that are out. And then I also often look at the labial, why am I forgetting this name? The label projection, what is that? Yeah, it's label process, because it's bidentate. And so that was, for me, another hint, if I have any, particularly in the males, if I have any suggestion, but that super flat clypeus is usually pretty obvious. And then it's like, oh yeah, orangish legs and a lot of pitting. Yeah.
So if you're convinced you don't have wilkella, and then you move on to couplet 28, and when the second part right below wilkella, the second part of that couplet, it says clypeus convex versus clypeus very flat. And when we say convex, it can be subtly convex, not this big, huge dome, but something that's, when you look at it closely, it's definitely not flat, but it may be weakly convex. So that took me some getting used to.
So clypeus, for wilkella, it is really dead flat, which is just very unusual. Yeah. Let's see, I'll try and get the species up here of Simandrena.
So
I think
yeah,
I
the
may
next
have it up already.
next couplet starts off with the, if I'm remembering right, is the propodial corbicula.
Yeah,
And
here's just so people
okay.
can see, Mike. Here's a list for in the east. Nasonii is dirt common. Wheeleri is around, and then most of the rest I just don't see. But what do you see here on this list in the Midwest?
The same ones, Nasonii and Wheeleri in the upper Midwest. But in the Midwest, Nasonii is arguably one of the most common spring andrenas. I mean, it's just, it's a polylectic thing. It visits all kinds of plants. It's in a lot of different kinds of habitats. And if you're in the Midwest, and it sounds like in the East as well, if you're collecting off plants in the spring, you're going to come across it. I mean, it's that common.
If you're in lawn, it's in lawns all over the place.
Yeah. It's a very non-habitat specific species. And one of the hallmarks of that subgenus, the propodial corbicula, is what we call complete. And I know that maybe the first week we started doing this, Andrena, we showed images. And David, I know you have some really good ones. When we say propodial corbicula complete, it's just like a nice round basket of dense plumose hairs that surround an empty space within. So within that basket of hairs, there are no other hairs. The space is what is devoid of hairs, which is fairly unusual.
I can share the screen to show that picture again.
Okay.
Yeah.
Also, I have a note in the chat to read. So these are the corbiculas, right?
Yep, perfect. That's gorgeous. So now when they're loaded with pollen, then it becomes, I mean, a little more difficult to determine, but still, I think you can figure it out. And often in this, when there are no internal hairs, it's a little easier to flick out the pollen without damaging anything and see if there are any internal hairs. When there are internal hairs, the pollen does not want to come out readily. But if there are no internal hairs, it's just kind of being held there by the surrounding hairs. So anyway, that's
another,
go ahead.
Another reason to wash and dry your bees well too, so that's not all gooped up.
So Eric asks, the Andrena species can be determined partially by calendar date. Do the adults die off after a mating period, or what happens to have different Andrena species at different time periods?
Yeah, I think, once it, for some of these species that range widely, it totally depends on geography. But yeah, I mean, like in Missouri, for example, there's only a certain subset of species that occur in April, and a different subspecies that occur in June, and a different group of species that occur in September. And that's being very broad about it. It's a little more specific than that. But yeah, it's a very, at least once you're familiar with the regional fauna, time of year, or the time that something was collected, is very informative, especially with Andrena and some other groups. Does that
I'll pull up Nasonii picture here. So we're in the collections on Flickr section. And I think I went back maybe too far, but we can do this this way. So yeah, this is the one that just everyone runs into, and the other one, it's not wilkella, it's
Wheeleri.
Wheeleri can be a little tricky. It just doesn't seem to have. It's basically doesn't have all these nice white hairs, and I don't see it enough. I see it in the Appalachians, but not many other places. But there's a male, which we'll talk about another day. There's these that Mike has yet to point out, but the lovely big wide flanges on the tibia with very short hairs.
Yeah,
which
very
is
distinctive.
usually
Yeah.
a giveaway, and this gigantic facial, this is Nasonii only, has a very giant fovea that covers the space between the eye and the ocelli.
Yeah,
Okay.
males are a little trickier, but we'll talk about that later.
Yeah.
So yeah, Nasonii is the common species in the east of the Rockies in Simandrena, and again, if you're collecting in the spring, you're probably going to find it. So the rest, the rest of the subgenera and groups that are below couplet 28, all of them have some amount of internal hairs in the podial corbicula. And again, that when you've got a pollen load in the corbicula, it's hard to tell sometimes. But that's one of the key things. And sometimes there's tergal fascia, sometimes there aren't. And now we're starting to get into a group, the rest of the subgenera and the rest of the key, it gets murkier, in my opinion, murkier and murkier, because you get to the point where there is not a single character that designates a particular subgenus. That's a group of characters. So it becomes a little trickier. So this next group, Callandrena, another very large group, a lot of species. The subgenus occurs across the whole country. Again, mostly spring bees, and if you're collecting in the spring, you're probably going to run across some kind of Callandrena. Some of the hallmarks are size. Most of them are big, and some of them are very big, very chunky. Some of the biggest Andrena are in the subgenus Callandrena, and they are. Size is a good indicator. Spring flight period and large size, and the propodial triangle is relatively smooth. It's not roughened or reticulate the way Plastandrena or Rhacandrena were. It's relatively smooth. And so other than that, there are enough species that there's considerable variation, but in general, the pygidial plate doesn't have an internal triangle, and generally there are not dense tergal fascia the way we just saw in that Simandrena. There are no Callandrena that have that kind of a dense, thick, very distinctive tergal fascia. They have some to some extent.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Sam.
But Mike, I was going to say that sometimes, and I can't recall Hilaris or something. I can't remember which species. There's a couple, maybe Alini, that have a very short piece on the far lateral sides that is, like very noticeable, nearly dense, but never in the center.
Right.
So
not complete.
Yeah.
Good point. So yeah, then I don't, you mentioned Hilaris. That's one of the, some of these are beautiful bees, and Hilaris is one of the big ones. And at least in the Midwest, it's usually at things in the blueberry family, but sometimes others. But it's a striking bee. And so several others. I don't know if you get Barbara on the east, but Barbara has
it's very common.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it has often a slight bluish metallic sheen, subtle to the tergites. So there's this, it's a very common group.
Yeah, I would, one thing that I use a lot in that group, and I don't know if there's exceptions, is that the vertex is almost always about 2, sometimes a little bit more ocelli diameters away from the lateral ocelli. So, which is not, there are other species that have that, but when you have this combination of a really big bee and a wide vertex, then the next thing I look at is, does it have a humeral angle or the ridge kind of thing going on? Then I go, oh, I've got perplexa. And then the remainder almost always fall into that Callandrena class. And after a while, there's, like Mike was mentioning, there is a certain look and feel with that, the dorsal triangle having very few striations and just big, that often just tells you what's going on. But are there exceptions to the recessed lateral ocelli being quite so distant from the vertex?
Yeah, Confederata. Which
right.
is narrow, and the whole bee is narrow. It's a very once you learn it, that's a very distinctive Andrena because it's super thin, super narrow compared to the others. And most of the Andrena are kind of chunky, but Confederata is slender.
Right. It's also at the smaller end of the large bees.
Mm-hmm.
It is large, but not quite as large. And here's one. When I see Confederata, you're right. Now that I think about it, it's got like 1.5 ocelli diameters from the vertex. But the amount of shagreening or tessellation or microscopic lines across all these tergites is really striking compared to the other Melandrena to me. And pretty skinny legs.
Yes.
And sometimes orange.
Okay.
In the males in particular.
Okay.
Oh, let me get back to here.
And there's another species at least in the Midwest, that's arguably maybe the most common of Melandrena, and it's Carlini, and it looks like a mini bumblebee, yellow and black. And in most of the Midwest, I mean, you can field ID it. It's that distinctive. Once you get further up in the Great Lakes region, or even further north, there's one or two others that sort of look like it. But there you go. Yeah, I mean,
So you can see,
yellow thorax, dark abdomen. I mean, it's bumblebee-ish. Looks or Anthophora abrupta-like. I mean, it's the same pattern co-occurs across many genera. Everybody wants to be a bumblebee.
And within Melandrena, that's a pretty good split. Things that have all black scopal hairs versus ones that have all light, or some of them have a kind of combination. And usually when they have darker hairs, they're not jet black like Vicina and Carlini. They're brownish, but certainly not. Yeah, they're dark, but not black. But the separating out the black ones, which would be only 3 species, I think, but there's like, this is super common, but then Vicina is also very similar and tends to be the next common one. And then if you're up north, what do you get that begins with regularis?
Yep. Yeah. So, very important subgenus. You're going to run across it if you're collecting in the spring, and obviously you can see across the whole country there are a lot of species, and it can it can be kind of tricky separating Sei from Illini. Some of these things.
That is a tough pair.
Yeah, it is
right there.
Yeah. So it really helps to have comparative material, which means the more you collect, and look under the scope, it's a learning process, and it's taken Sam and I forever to get to the point we're at, and we're still a long way from where we want to be. So it just takes time.
Yeah, and we have had the advantage of having access to really good collections where things were already identified mostly correctly, and so we could sort of suss out what the patterns were. So yay for collections. We need more of those. A number of you are collections managers, so we really appreciate what you do. Within Melandrena, the
2 questions in the chat I'm going to interrupt you with real quick.
Okay.
2 chat questions. Matt's wondering if you can give any brief tips between Carlini and Pruni. Doesn't Pruni also have that Bombus-esque general impression? And I wants to verify if Vicina and Carlini both have black scopal hair.
So Pruni would be much more related to Barbara, and it's got light scopal hairs, very light. And then Vicina and Carlini are the sort of the dark scopal haired pair. And actually Vicina has a few light hairs up on the femur part of the scopal hairs, but no one pays attention to it. So
another thing about female Pruni, the facial fovea are quite narrow compared to all the other eastern Callandrena, and that's pretty helpful usually.
A big split between the light sculpt. So there's a whole bunch of Callandrena that have light scopal hairs, and they can get you to confusing fast. So a good split for those, which I use all the time, which initially I was a little hesitant about, so it's useful to learn. Maybe we'll pull a specimen here, is on the hind trochanters, there's plumose hairs, so that's another place that they would be gathering pollen. But there's this notion of complete plumose hairs and incomplete plumose hairs, which until you look at a lot and get things pointed out, it's like, I'm not quite sure what that means, but it's something I look at all the time.
Yeah, very useful.
And it's basically means that if it's complete, then on the trochanter, this is just the hind trochanter, there's roughly equally long, big long hairs for gathering pollen. And when you have incomplete, there's about halfway, the hairs become dramatically shorter. It's very noticeable, and so you don't have to like guess, but that helps separate out a couple of the groups that can be confusing. While you continue on, Mike, I'll try and get an incomplete one and put it up on deck.
I don't think we've shown trochanteral flocculus yet, so that'd be a good one. So yeah, if you feel like you don't have a Callandrena, the next.
Wait, did we answer I's question as well?
Repeat it again. Was it a difference between Carl and I?
Vicina and Carl and I both have black scopal hair, correct?
Carl and I to me, it's really black, and Vicina is a little less so, and the clypeus is different in the two. There's some other characteristics. I'm trying to remember it in Wally's key whether I think they both come out in the same part of the key as having dark scopal hairs.
It's the scopal hairs look largely the same. There is some differences in the femur. The color of the hairs on the femur, Vicina adds like a row of light ones, but that's not no one really looks at the scopal hairs on the femur very much, so it's not that useful. What I'm mostly looking at to tell them apart is I'm looking at the hairs on the cheek or the gena of the females. So in Carlini, there's black hairs a lot of black hair in there, and in Vicina, it's all light hairs. And additionally, on the pleura or the side of the specimen, there's a lot of black hair in Carlini and very little to none in Vicina. Vicina is also a tad larger.
Another thing, Vicina does not have a internal triangle on the pygidial plate, and Carl and I does. And sometimes you can't see that, but that's helpful.
I'm looking for my microscope thing, which there it is. And go to here. I've got Commoda. While I'm doing this, Mike, you want to talk about Commoda a little bit? It's got
Malar length, Joan says.
What?
Joan says Malar length. Is that a key character that you use?
Not for those two not for Carl and I and Vicina. But maybe I should.
Yeah, I don't use it either, but again, there are potentially other people.
Yeah, most Callandrena don't have a conspicuous malar space. I think that malar space could be called linear with most of them, but there might be one or two exceptions, so that's worth looking at. So here's the trochanteral flocculus.
Yeah. Let me get this to be full screen.
So this is Andrena commoda. This is a Callandrena, and this is one that sometimes, at least in the Midwest, has orangish, reddish legs. But the trochanteral flocculus in commoda is really reduced, and
So you can see the long hairs on roughly half, and then the really short hairs on the other. And like Mike said, even these long hairs are reduced compared to the others, which often are long and curl over.
Oh yeah, remarkable.
And so it's this shorter and longer combo is the is a key. Isn't that another one with maybe slightly less than 2 ocelli distances on the vertex? I can't remember.
I can't either, Sam. Can't remember.
Yeah.
It's fairly common in the Midwest.
Yeah, more northern, I would say. I don't see it much here. Maybe I think we have it in the mountains. I'm going to pull up the vertex here.
Yeah, it's all over Missouri, and in all kinds of habitats. And collects pollen from a lot of different plants. You know, another thing about the at least the eastern Callandrena, they're all pollen generalists for the most part. And, you know, we were the Callandrena subgenus, you know, they're all specialists on some kind of Asteraceae. But with Callandrena, you know, you might find them on a great variety of spring plants. So it's hard to target a particular plant and expect a particular Callandrena to be there.
Yeah, often they're woodies, so bushes, rosaceous things, and trees.
Yep.
So this is a little bit maybe hard to read. So it's still quite long a distance between the backside of the ocelli and the backside of the vertex. Maybe 2, maybe not 2. So I'm not sure that's a great character. I know there's some antennal differences, like the first flagellar segment compared to the second can be useful. Maybe I'm thinking of the male though. So anyway, I'll stop talking. We'll go back to the subgenera.
The next, you know, again, if you're convinced you don't have a Callandrena, and you move on, what you're looking for a number of things. Species that are smaller, less than 12 millimeters, and most of the things we're going to be looking at from now on are smaller, with a couple exceptions. And or if you see these really dense, complete apical white fossae on the tergites, which again no Callandrena have. They might have them laterally a little bit, but not complete and like this next choice. So the next one is the subgenus Scaphandrena, and in this couplet it says Scaphandrena arabis. The reason is because that's the only Scaphandrena east of the Great Plains that exist. Once you get into the west, in Great Plains and west, there are quite a few species in that subgenus Scaphandrena. And but in the east, this is it, Andrena arabis. And most of them in that subgenus are specialists on some kind of mustard, something in the Brassicaceae. That's not exclusively so, but mostly. And they have usually somewhat broadened hind tibia, somewhat like you saw with Nasoni. And so the eastern one, arabis, again, it's a spring species, a fairly early spring species. Visits things, mustards like in the genus Arabis. Sometimes I haven't seen it from Dentaria or Cardamine, and even Barbaria, which is introduced wintercrest. It will occasionally collect pollen from that. So this is a mustard bee, and if you want to find it, you know, look for some spring blooming things in the family, the mustard family, and you're likely to find it. It doesn't appear to be weedy. I mean, I find it, at least in the Midwest, generally only in pretty nice habitats.
Yeah, toothworts is another good one to find it on.
Yep. So it's a pretty distinctive bee. It's a good size, dense fascia, kind of a broadened hind tibia. And the facial
fovea. You can see these short. Yeah, there's.
There you go. Facial fovea are short. Ooh, that's nice.
And also, trying to think if it's just male or I know it's I think the female too, slightly flattened. If I remember right, don't they have a slightly flattened clypeus?
They do a little bit, not to the extreme of wilkella.
Yeah.
But
when you look at a lot of bees, then sometimes these subtleties become like, oh, wait, I'm seeing something different here versus a clear black and white kind of character. So a lot of times I'll see a flattened Clypeus, again, flattened compared to other things. And I'll be like, okay, wait a minute. What could that be? Could it be, wilkella? I'm in the woods and it's early. Maybe it's arabis, or maybe it's the, what's the other spring bee? Erythronii.
Definitely flattened there. Yeah. So that's a pretty easy couplet. It's just one species involved in the east, and it's a fairly distinctive thing and specific to a group of plants. So that makes it, if you're collecting from plants, it makes it relatively straightforward. Now, this is where, at least from my perspective, the rest of these subgenera are really, they're a challenge, because they all look more or less, they look the same. They don't have any outstanding characteristic that immediately identifies them. And I pulled my hair out many times with these next groups. That's the subgenus Euandrena, Thaisandrena, and Rhacandrena. And what they all have in common is the pronotum is totally simple. There's no pronotal modification. There's generally no dense tergal fascia. They're very, I hate to use the word ordinary, but nothing jumps out immediately when you look at them until you gradually learn them. And there are lots of them. So the subgenus Rhacandrena is the smallest of. They're only in the east. There are only 3 species, and I think there's actually only one other one, and that's in the west. So it's a small subgenus, and the other 2, the Thaisandrena and the Euandrena, are big, relatively big. So Rhacandrena is pretty straightforward. They are in the east.
I'm trying to pull it up, but the guide is not progressing. I think we might even be frozen here. Oh, I think my whole browser window is frozen. Okay. All right. We'll go back there, and I'll open up a different window and do it that way.
So in the Rhacandrena, the facial fovea are long. And when we say long, we mean that they reach below the antennal sockets, and again, it's not dramatically below, but it's, if you get a good image under the scope, and you get it maybe kind of an oblique view, you can see that, oh yeah, the facial fovea are just a little bit below those lower margins of the antennal sockets. And that's important because, the ones that are going to be coming up, the other subgenera don't, they're shorter. So that's an important thing to notice for the females. And
sorry, Mike, I'm having problems with my computer, but you can see the guide, your guide here now, right?
Yeah, I can. Yeah, you're right. Okay,
all right. We can have that at least. Everything else seems to be stopped working, but we'll stick with this.
So, and I don't know about on the in the east, but the 2 of the species in Rhacandrena are pretty much plant specialists. One is a specialist on Amorpha, false indigo bush, or lead plant, and the other, at least in the Midwest, is you find it only on sumac, and several different.
Mike, do you remember what species those are?
Yes, the Cragini, Cragini, Rhacandrena cragini is the Amorpha specialist, kind of rare. And then the other one is, there are 2, Robertsoni and, Sam, what's the other one? I always get those.
Brevipalpus.
Yeah, Brevipalpus and Robertsoni. In the Midwest, Brevipalpus is common and almost always either smooth sumac or
Yeah.
the other sumac, copalina. The other one, Robertson eye, is pretty. I mean, it occurs in the Midwest, but it's not very common, and it looks just like brevipalpus. Those two are very difficult to tell apart in the females, anyway, and often fly together. But brevipalpus, in my experience in the Midwest, is the common one, and Robertson eye much less so. But it's very easy to think you have one when you have the other. At least,
Yeah.
I
have to say that it's the opposite here. Robertsonii is the common one, and brevipalpus is the uncommon one.
What do you find? What do you find those at?
Robertsonii is on a greater range of things, and shows up in bowls, comes out earlier, and than brevipalpus. And but the nice thing is, if you have a series of both, then you can, then it's like, oh, you can see all. So like Discover Life and Mike's Key, I'm sure has the same thing. We go into a lot of detail about the pitting and the differences in subtle differences in where the ocelli line is. There's several things in it. And the color of the, I find that useful, the color of the antennae.
Yep.
The underside of the antennae, bright orange or fairly bright orange underneath in brevipalpus, and relatively, I think I could say absolutely dark in the other, but it's a very, very dull one. But it's sort of the package deal. Like, oh, I can check off these things. And then having a set of specimens. And then time of year, knowing that Robertsonii can occur earlier in the year is useful. But yeah, tricky. And I also find that this is, like you said, like these tend to be hair pullers. These, because they show up here and there, I tend to then go like, oh, what is that? And then spend a bunch of time keying it out, and then realizing like, oh, it's just Robertsonii again. So now almost immediately, if I'm like, I'm not quite sure what that is, I go, is it Robertsonii again? And a lot of, because it's so ordinary.
Yeah, that's a good word. And even these last three subgenera, Rhacandrena, Euandrena, and Taeniandrena, in Wally LaBerge's subgeneric treatments, each of those three subgenera, he says, are difficult to define. That's one of his first statements. So that tells you something. At the subgenus level, these three are really, can be tricky. A little less so in the East because they're, you don't have to deal with the whole continent like he was doing. But still, it's,
Yeah, and so be warned that this is an area, as we've already found out, that is likely to have where the taxonomists and the molecular people in general are going to be playing around.
So, let's see, what are we looking at there, Sam?
I'm just bringing up, it's now working. So yeah,
okay.
Here's brevipalpus, Robertsonii, Craigini. That's a very far northern one, isn't it?
It's in Missouri, southern Missouri.
Is it in Missouri? Okay.
Yeah, not common, but it gets up to, I think it's in extreme southern Minnesota. So it's not a widely distributed thing. It's right. I think of it as a rarity, really, compared to the other two.
Yeah. And we don't.
So Matt adds that I don't remember what species we were on that you got cardamom out there, if that was before the Robertsonii collection conversation. But he also finds them on Zizia, Astybe, I don't know that one. Hydrophyllum, Rubus, Viburnum. Says they seem pretty polylectic unless there are some cryptic species.
And which species is he talking about? Or is he talking about a group?
Robertsonii.
Okay.
Robertsonii?
Yep.
Yeah. It's more.
A lot of different things.
Yeah, it's on a bunch of different things. Tends to be, I would say, more on the woody end of the spectrum, but it just doesn't seem to be locked in to any particular plant as much. And that's why it's always like, oh, what is that? Oh, it's Robertsonii again.
So I know we're kind of getting short on time, but I want to say that with these next two groups, what the traditional subgenus Euandrena and Dicandrena, one way in the East, one way to break them apart is based on the galea, and in 3 or 4 species of Euandrena, the galea are pointed and spear-like, sharply pointed apically, not rounded or blunt, and it's pretty distinctive. And again, we're talking mouth parts, which sometimes you might not be able to see, but it really helps. It breaks out several species that otherwise look kind of general. And most of those are specialists. So those are Andrena geranii, Andrena facilii, and Andrena polomonii. And remarkably, the species names conform to their preferred plants. So almost. So Andrena geranii is on hydrophyllum, at least in the Midwest. That's its primary host plant. And Andrena facilii is on Facilia species, and then polomonii is on Polymonium, what we used to call rectans, like Jacob's ladder. And they all have the pointed, sharp galea. And so that's a nice, discrete spring group that you can break apart if you can see those mouth parts. I don't know if those all occur out of you, Sam, or yeah, they're cool.
Yeah.
Little
Yeah.
metallic,
So,
sometimes a little metallic sheen to geranii. It's a neat group.
Matt, you should tell your pulmonii story. If you can jump in, or I could tell it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's really a story, but it's we found them at Mount Cuba Center in northern Delaware in abundance on Pulmonium reptans, which is a range extension from West Virginia. I forget.
Well, it's the border of the nearest record was, maybe still is, border of West Virginia, Ohio.
Yeah.
Wow.
So still no idea how that got there, if it's natural disjunction or some sort of introduction with plant material or whatever, but I haven't been able to find them anywhere else around here. And I know Pete Woods has been sort of looking in Pennsylvania and hasn't come across them yet in Pennsylvania. So anybody in the mid-Atlantic in between, good thing to keep an eye out for.
Yeah.
Yeah. Pulmoni is not a very common in the woods plant near where we are. It's not like a coastal plain or seemingly Piedmont. Now, maybe when you get to the limestone-y or some of the mountain areas, it is, but I've just never run across it. So that might be part of it. No one's collecting on it and has collected on it or had opportunity to collect on it in the DC area, particularly in where the people from the National Collection used to hang out.
It's abundant at the host plant, though. Like, even though this was a disjunction, I mean, I collected a dozen in a minute or two in one patch. So, if it's there, it'll be pretty evident, I think.
Well, you found several other groups of Andrena and other species. For example, the Heuchera specialists, Calides, Estivalis, all over the place. And so Mount Cuba, worthy of a visit for the plants, full of all kinds of uncommon spring ephemerals and shady native plants in abundance, though. And so my feeling is that these bees are around at low levels, and it's only when, one, people look, and two, when you have this big chunk of specimens that they show up. So we'll see.
I suspect that some of these really ephemeral-rich floodplains in southeastern Pennsylvania probably have a bunch of these things as well. And somebody, I can't remember the name of the group, but there were some students that found Estivalis, for example, in a bunch of sites along the Susquehanna where just nobody had looked until the last couple of years. So, yeah,
on native Heuchera, I forget which one, the white one that hangs out on cliff faces. So you can see why that it goes undetected.
Though,
the Heuchera,
I was gonna say I've not been able to find Geranii despite a bunch of messing around with hydrophyllum. So one does seem to be maybe we'll find it yet, but I've looked for that and can't find it in this area.
I'm not sure we have any records for Maryland. I can't recall if it is. There's only one or two and maybe old.
There, in the Midwest, particularly the upper Midwest, there's some some confusion because there's an old synonym of campanuli that we are convinced now, at least Jason and Zach and myself, that it's distinct. And then there's another one in the lower Midwest that flies with geranii and visits hydrophyllum, but it's different and it's undescribed. So as far as we can tell. So there's there's some things to learn about that species group.
So is that 3 or 2?
3.
3. Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's not a bee. I think perhaps if I spent more time in the mountains in the spring, where there's a much richer and different and more northern vernal flora, we'd see this species, but we just don't see it in this area.
Yeah, and time is limited. It's not like they fly for a month. You got to be there.
Yeah,
really.
Everything is happening in
yes,
that month.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. Timing is everything.
We'll also, as we wrap up, throw this thing in that David put in the chat. Euandrina in the West, 2 commonest species are Aracoma and Astragalli. Gallia are distinctly blunt, contrast to all others. Presumably they come out somewhere else in Mike's Key.
Well, those are Western, but yes, the Euandrina that have blunt Gallia we're not finished with the key yet. We'll cover that later. But yes, there are a bunch of Euandrina with blunt Gallia, and in the old days, those ones that had the sharp pointed Gallia were considered something else. And then at one point, LaBerge and cohorts said, well, these probably belong in Euandrina, which tells you why there's maybe some issues with molecular stuff going on these days. So stay tuned.
All right.
We're on the leading edge of science here, guys.
Wow.
Right here, happening in these podcast episodes. Is that what this is now? Okay, well, thank you, everyone.